So good morning. This is the first day of spring. That's why I'm wearing no, that's not why. It matches the outfit, but whatever. Okay, so I hope everybody's doing well after our fun time with the earthquake and COVID and all of the other fun things we're dealing with. It's just such an exciting time to be here, isn't it? All righty. Today, we're going to start talking about the executive branch or presidential powers. Okay, so this is our second branch. We were Congress for a while. Now we're going to look at the executive. And there is a crash course on the website on the Canvas page that has questions embedded in it. So I need you to watch that. And then as the question pops up, you're going to type your answer to it and then submit it afterwards. It's an assignment. All right, so here's an overview of the executive branch. So we've got this page here. I always do this on a flower graph because, it's spring and flower power is a real thing. I mean, it's a real thing. So these petals of the flower represent the different kinds of power that the executive has. These lines on the outside of the flower pointing in show the different entities that have power to check the executive and to influence him. So these lines on the outside, if you want to draw a flower in your notes, that would be good. We're going to have a test on this. So you're going to need to know this. And I think when I need to know something, to put it in a graph is more helpful. But you can see I've also done it on these notes here. And you can look at the notes. They'll be on Canvas also. So he is the head of his political party. So right now, Trump is the head Republican. And when Obama was president, he was the head Democrat. And then we're going to start here at the top of the graph with the executive powers. And we think of him as he is the head of the executive branch. He's the chief executive. He has 3.5 million employees. That includes all of the armed services and a lot of the bureaucracies. He's their boss. And so he can control their wages and what they do, etc. So anyway, all of those things are, so he has all of those employees that he works with. And when Obama said he was going to raise the minimum wage in his State of the Union address, a lot of people got really upset. He can't do that. Only Congress can do. Well, he could, and he did for his 3.5 million employees. So if you work for the government, even if you're just, collecting trash or mopping the floors, you can't make less than $10.75 an hour because he did that for them. He was trying to set an example for the rest of the nation. He has to make sure all laws are faithfully executed. That's what it says in Article 2 of the Constitution. He has to make sure they're obeyed, that those laws are enforced and obeyed. He creates a national budget. Now, once he creates that, he hands it over to Congress. He can't put money in it. He can just say, we would like to spend this much money for this and this much money for that and this much money for that, etc. But he can't actually put funds into it. He is the face of the U.S. When people think of our country at this moment, they are thinking of Trump. Legislative powers. So that's right over here with this hand, if you can see that. And I would suggest that you write this down and take a note and put it in a flower, because a graph tends to organize your thoughts and then you remember it better. And we will have a test on this subject. So he can veto legislation. We've talked about that before. He can slam that on the paper that says veto in big red letters. He's got a stamp. Or he can do a pocket veto, which means he just puts it in his pocket and pretends like it's not there. In 10 days, if he does that, it will become law anyway, except and unless those last 10 days are at the very end of that legislative session, then that bill dies and it does not become a law. He can call special sessions of Congress, which means that if Congress is in recess and they're home and the nation needs something to be done, he can say, you get back here and you fix this. Now, he can't tell them how to vote and what to decide, but he can say, you can't go home and you can't stop having sessions of Congress until this is done. He can suggest legislation. That's why we call Obamacare, instead of the Affordable Care Act, which is its official name, we call it Obamacare, because Obama wanted that to become legislation. And so that's why we can do that. This is really how popular the president is. If he suggests legislation, if he's popular, it gets done. If he's not popular, it might not get done. Also, he can make executive orders. These have the force of law for the 3.5 million employees that he has. Those people must obey those executive orders. And in times of war or times of emergency, for instance, right now, during this outbreak of the coronavirus, he can make executive orders that we would have to live with. So far, the federal government has made suggestions about what we should be doing, and then the states have made decisions about how we're going to act during this. But he could actually do that, and it would have the force of law. Then he has judicial powers. So down in this one, there's only 2. You'll notice that each petal has 4 things, except for judicial powers. He just has 2. And that means that he can grant pardons. He can do a get out of jail free for those guys who are in federal prisons. He can't do it for state prisons, but for federal prisons. He can appoint federal judges. This is not just Supreme Court justice. These are the 600 and some odd federal court judges that we have that try federal cases for the first time, have juries and their trials because they've committed crimes in more than one state, or they have broken federal law, not just state law, not just county law. Then he has diplomatic powers. He appoints, you notice there's several appoint federal judges, appoint ambassadors. He appoints the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He has 3 appoint things in here. He appoints ambassadors to the nations. These are our representatives there. He makes treaties and agreements with other nations. So, for instance, NAFTA, the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, that was, North American Free Trade Agreement, North America, not North Atlantic. That was between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. And Bill Clinton did that. He did not have to have senatorial approval. He just signed it. It was a trade agreement, and presidents can do that. They have that power without going to Congress to ask for permission. But treaties have to be okayed by the Senate. So, for instance, First World War, Wilson wrote that treaty and the Versailles Treaty, was so proud of it, brings it home. Senate says, no way, Jose. We don't want to be part of Europe, and we don't want to have to support them if they have another war. We don't want to do that. So they didn't okay that treaty. He creates foreign policy. So how we're going to treat other nations, he meets with ambassadors from foreign countries, and he decides how we're going to treat those people and whether we're going to allow them to immigrate to this country or do other things. Now, Congress can write immigration law that supersedes what he does, that goes over his head. But for the most part, he gets to make those decisions. He is the leader of the free world. Ever since World War II, we've been dubbed this through the Cold War, World War II. But it is persuasive power only. So we use the carrot and the stick. We can say, here's some nice free grain. The United States always produces more grain than we need to feed our people. So we sometimes either sell that at a really low price or give it to other nations that are short on food if they will go along with what we want them to do. So we use that carrot and we give them money and all sorts of aid, and we make trade agreements with them, et cetera, et cetera. Or we use the stick. We are going to embargo. We are not going to trade with you. We're going to withdraw any federal aid. Foreign aid. We are going to not support you anyway. And so that's our carrot and that's our stick that we use with other nations. He has military power. So he is the commander in chief. And we always want a just a regular citizen, civilian, to be in charge of the army. We don't want the head of the army to be in charge of the nation. We want the nation to be in charge of the army so that they are under our control. We've had a lot of famous generals and famous military men that have become presidents. There's been 11, but we don't, they have to be out of the army for a certain amount of time before they can actually run for president. And he appoints the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So these are the heads of all the military, the head of the Army, the head of the Navy, head of the Air Force, head of all of those branches of the armed forces. He appoints that head. The Army always has a 5-star general that's in charge of them. The Navy always has a civilian. The SecNav, the Secretary of the Navy, is not a military guy usually. In fact, they usually move over from the CIA. It's kind of a weird thing for the Navy, but that's how they've done it. Teddy Roosevelt was the SecNav during the Spanish-American War until he quit to lead the Rough Riders. So he appoints all those guys into his staff. Must ensure national security. So right now, that means that Trump is trying to get ahead of this coronavirus by getting money out there to help people if they've lost their jobs, to compensate, to make sure that testing is available, and that he might have the Army Corps of Engineers or the Army Corps of Doctors, medical people, actually go in to support civilian forces if we run out. Like we ran out of hospitals, which they did during the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic, which, by the way, is interesting. When they ran out of hospitals, it was still really good weather. It was in September that things got really bad, September, October of 1918. And when they ran out of hospitals, they started putting people on beds out in the open air. And what's ironic about that is they were the ones who recovered first and got healthier. So if you're sick, you might want to open some windows in your house. You might want to go out into your yard and be in the outdoors. The sun and the fresh air actually help people recover a lot of times. Now, you don't want to sleep out there at night maybe, but it might help if you're not feeling well, because those were the people in the 1918 flu that did well. And so that's part of national security. It isn't just threats from other nation, it's internal threats too, or threats from illness, disease, as we've seen. He can't declare war. Now, nowadays, that's not so important, but that's one of the things here. He can't declare war. We don't make presidents declare war before we give them lots and lots of money, but that is on Congress. We blame presidents for wars, but we shouldn't. We should hold Congress responsible, because remember, they have the power of the purse. If they don't like what the president is doing, all they have to do is withdraw funds. That's what they did in Vietnam. They started taking funds away, and that forced us to get out of Vietnam after 10 some odd years of being there and 50,000 guys dying. But Congress has to shovel billions of dollars to a president in order to fight a war. So even though the president can't declare war and we don't make him do this, I think that's a bad thing. I think presidents should be made to come to Congress to declare war before we get involved in military campaigns. And we have stopped doing that, which is what it says in the Constitution. Anyway, that's my little opinion. So these are the 4 entities that have influence over the president. So you notice I put Congress right here by the legislative pedal, because Congress has power to influence the president. We saw that they attempted to impeach the current president right now, and that's one of the ways that they have power over him. They also have power of the purse. They don't have to fund what he wants them to fund. So if Trump gets on their backs again, they may try something else. I don't know. Then over here, we have public opinion. I put it next to the executive